Alabama, Michigan, just days away now at the college football playoff Rose Bowl game. And we got Steve Deace here from Michigan Podcast. Everybody gather up, leave those comments and questions. We would appreciate considering the super chat option as well right here at the Voice of College Football. Steve, how you doing today?
The most wonderful time of the year, Mark. I can't be better. How about you?
It is in many ways, even though the bowl season has taken a hit based on people's attitudes and so forth. And also, I understand it's the opt-outs and not knowing, okay, what teams are we seeing and how credible and valid are these results? Because I, like you, love to match up like-seeded teams and then by extension be able to rate and rank and evaluate these conferences based on those at one point being the most valid and meaningful games played between conferences all season. And now you got to look at each one with a different lens, with a different scope based on who didn't make the game and what's the motivation and the incentive. So how much of a hit has your bowl pleasure taken in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to create a wormhole that will just waste our time going down, but I will be interested to see when, with the advent of the 12-team playoff next year, you know, many of these bowl games exist because your former employer just needs programming this time of year. They own a lot of these bowls and their TV ratings are pretty strong. And so I will be fascinated to see if that continues with the advent of the 12-team playoff here next year. And if it is, then, carry on. And I certainly am not going to, argue against having more college football on my television, especially because when the season ends, it's the longest off season we have. I mean, we're not going to get games that count again for another 7.5 months, So you're not going to get an argument from me. But if the ratings decline and this looks more like a reward or much more like an NIT bid than any form of a reward, and I suspect that may be the case. I mean, the amount, particularly with the group of 5 teams, the amount of players that each group of 5 teams have in the transfer portal, of essentially players looking to escape relegation and move up. One thing, again, that's a rabbit hole and wormhole we can go down in, February when there's nothing else to talk about. But one thing I would actually advocate in that scenario is to expand the playoff to 32 teams and have no bowl games. And the bowl sites that we know now, like the Independence Bowl and the Duke's Mayo Bowl, it's still those games, and they serve as the host sites for some of the early round action of the college football playoff. And those are your postseason games. And every single one of them has meaning and, an opportunity in a survive and advance scenario to play for a national championship.
Wow. We will go into that during the off season because I've got so many questions that you could anticipate, I'm sure. Yeah, let's dive right into Alabama, Michigan. Let's just go to it. I just reviewed an article that was posted by The Athletic that I did not anticipate. I just ran into it here in the last couple hours, did not have a chance to read it word for word, but kind of glanced through the talking points. And this came from 10 coaches of various levels, position coaches, coordinators, head coaches.
Of the anonymous Big Ten coach.
Continue. The anonymous
Big Ten coaches. Of the anonymous red ass who's butthurt about getting his ass spanked 3 years in a row, marches on. Is it? And it's just a matter, it's a rotisserie, a menagerie. Which reporter was it this time? Okay. I mean, it's just, did they all call this time or just happened to call them? It's been quite the year for the anonymous, got my ass kicked Big Ten coach. But yes, go ahead, please continue.
They were talking about football about 92% of the time. The other, they did slip in a few comments about, possible with signals. We don't know if this is a byproduct of signals or otherwise, but those comments were being, but there is some nuts and bolts football here. So we'll start with quarterback JJ McCarthy, because yes, you could take all of the comments that were made and put them in one of 3 categories in terms of negative Michigan slant. And it was either tied to they're not as talented as Alabama. They don't have the speed, the freakish athletes to stay with Alabama. Number 2, their schedule was backloaded. That contributed to their lesser play in some areas on the field late in the season. Or number 3, they didn't have the advantage of the signal stealing late in the season against those opponents. So that's pretty much where you could take all these. But as it pertains to JJ McCarthy, is he going to have to be Michigan's version of Jalen Milroe and a better version of JJ McCarthy? Is he going to have to play out of his mind? I'm not going to say that he's got to show us something that he's never shown us, but maybe something he's rarely shown us for 60 minutes.
So I've watched these two teams a lot, and I've read portions of that Bruce Feldman piece in The Athletic, and I mean, I walked away, and I guess after reading that, I'm not surprised to find out that we were in the Gasparilla Motors Bowl this year. I mean, we are just we're clearly treading water here in a 7-5 program. I just was incredulous reading that. I mean, we're in the midst of one of the most dominant periods, not in Michigan football history, but Big Ten football history. I mean, I saw a graphic yesterday of how talented Ohio State's 21 recruiting class was. Those kids are 0-3 against Michigan with an average margin of defeat of 14.3 points per game. I mean, Michigan invented the Big Ten Conference, literally invented it as a league, created it. And what is it? We've won for the first time in school history, 24 games in a row or something against Big Ten opponents, most of them not even close. Michigan beat two big top 10 teams in the last month. There's only a handful of teams that beat two top 10 teams all year long. We had one near miss against an underwhelming foe, and it was on the road at Maryland in a classic sandwich game, which you all know something about as Buckeye fans. And frankly, it's a game that, in all honesty, maybe looking back on it, JJ McCarthy should not have played. Didn't practice all week long. He was so beat up from a shot that he took in the Penn State game. So I'm just kind of incredulous reading this, and I'm also enjoying it. I like being the son of a bitch. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I'm much more in favor of it. I'm not like a lot of the other Michigan fans who I can't even, and pearl clutched at, being the Oakland Raiders of college football this year. I was like, it's about damn time. I love this kind of stuff. And I told you when this all began with the sign stealing stuff, you guys are taking a team that was already on a mission and giving them added extra motivation. And the same thing is happening right here. Now listen, we're playing Alabama. I mean, this is arguably the most dominant program in the history of the sport. It is certainly, when you in the modern, post platoon system, post World War II era, this is the most dominant program that we have seen. You don't make money in college football by giving Nick Saban 3 to 4 weeks to prep for you. So I'm not unaware of who our opponent is, but me, I watch a lot of college football. I've watched these two teams a lot. I watched an Arkansas team that decided to not fire its coach because it knew the schedule it was going to take next year was so bad that it would just go ahead and take a mulligan for a season so the next coach could come in 25 with a fighting chance, almost beat this Alabama team. I was sitting in this very man cave watching live when Jalen Milroe pulled something out of his ass on 4th and 31 in one of the worst defended final plays since whatever defense Michigan was in it during the Colorado Hail Mary 30 years ago. The idea that, this isn't even the Alabama team we played in the Citrus Bowl with a first-round pick at quarterback, and he was the backup, and all 3 receivers were first-round picks in the NFL. They don't have that kind of skill position talent this year. Jalen Milroe is the entire offense for them. There's no Will Anderson level of draft pick this year. Dallas Turner is really good. Both their edges are really good. There's no Jonathan Allen. There's no Quinnen Williams just wrecking the interior gaps of your defense. I mean, I know their corners are really good. I'm not worried about how good your corners are. We're barely going to throw at those guys anyway. I don't care about that. Okay. The way we play, it's not like we're going to be out there chucking the ball outside the hashes 30 times. So, Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to get his calisthenics in. He'll look good out there running around, and Terry Arnold, they'll look good. They'll look like first-round draft picks, and they'll barely break a sweat, whether we're winning by 20 or losing by 20 the way we play. They're not really going to be factors in the game, So, I mean, we are 13-0 for a reason, man. I mean, all the analytics have had us pretty much number one since the middle of October. But I guess we suck, reading that Athletic piece, and I've never really, you know what the dumbest chant in sports is? After you beat a really good team and you chant overrated, why would you demean your own accomplishment? And to have your own league hate you so much that they're literally saying, we just sucked as a league. They're not any good. They just beat us because we just sucked as a league. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I sure as hell better not find out Ryan Day is one of those anonymous coaches. All right. I mean, you're out there telling everybody, well, we just weren't good as a league, basically. We sucked. I like that smoke. This Michigan team is different than any other I can remember, maybe since 1997. And we've had a lot of good teams other than, between that year and this one. But those are the two teams I can think of, Mark, that liked this kind of smoke, that wanted it, had that serrated edge. Okay. And so I think it's excellent motivation. My biggest concern in this game is just what Michigan's postseason performances have been under Jim Harbaugh, period. They've been dreadful in many cases, and like I said a few minutes ago, typically the path to success is not giving Nick Saban more time to study you, and so that is my concern is that right there. But matchups wise, I think we actually match up as well as you could ask to match up with an Alabama team in the college football playoff. And in many respects, it's like old Alabama Nick Saban with new Alabama Nick Saban. And it's kind of like what you see in March Madness in college basketball. They've got the McDonald's All-Americans. We've got the 4 stars that we kept in school, and developed. We got a lot of grown men. They got a lot of guys that still have some growing up to do. But I think the biggest edge here is the pregame and the pre-bowl prep. I think if you're a Michigan, I saw Adam Rittenberg say, regardless of what the analytics say, I mean, just the performance of these two coaches in the postseason, the chasm is so wide, he can't help but pick Alabama. I think that's as good of analysis as any. What I still find fascinating, Mark, one last thing on this soliloquy, and then I'll stop. What I find fascinating is all of this early sharp money on Alabama in this game, and yet Vegas has remained with Michigan as the favorite. They're really exposed right now. If you look at the money that has been bet, and fans aren't betting on a game 3 weeks in advance. Those are professionals, and I find that basically Vegas has taken a pro-Michigan position on the game when you look at the fact where the number has remained and the amount of money that has been wagered on Alabama.
Well, when I look at the various matchups and I look at the strengths and weaknesses of the teams, I've come to the conclusion that you just mentioned that Adam Rittenberg has come to, and I spit out a prediction on your show last week that may or may not be the final prediction that I make, but that's where I'm at right now, because I do think that everything that you stated about Alabama is correct. However, we have seen those vulnerabilities out of Alabama teams in the past in regards to not necessarily the talent comparison you were making position to position, but the underwhelming performances against the likes of Auburn in Iron Bowls past and other marginal teams that they have slipped up or almost tripped up against. So we've seen that out of Alabama teams that then rose to the occasion in the playoff to win a national championship, challenge for a national championship. But Jalen Milroe would be the one in terms of an X and O factor that I just don't know where Michigan's going to. I'm not doubting that they can contain him, but they just haven't seen anything like him.
Well, someone mentioned this to me after you and I talked about this on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't considered it, and it was right in front of my face. And lo and behold, there's a story out I read yesterday about how essentially Alex Orji is mimicking Jalen Milroe in practice. They're basically the same guy. Now, Orji's not as developed as a passer, but Jalen Milroe is not developed as a passer. He throws a great deep ball. That's about all he throws. I'm actually not concerned about that. I'm not. I mean, our defensive coordinator coached against Lamar Jackson and practiced every day. I think you're going to watch Michigan. I think their game plan is going to be, you sit in the pocket and you throw the ball up the seam accurately and throw deep outs accurately. And if you do that, well, tip our cap. Good luck in the national championship game. But we're not going to be blitzing and everything else and letting you come out of the pocket. We're going to keep you in there, funnel you in there, and good luck to you. We're going to make you read the defense and fit the ball into windows. And if you execute that with complementary football, the way Michigan plays offense, they're not going to get a lot of short fields. I'm more worried about the Michigan offense than I am the Michigan defense.
I guess, yeah. So where they're going to score, how they're going to score, because of, if this was the Michigan offensive line performance of the last 2 years and not the one that I've seen over the last 6 weeks.
I agree with what you're about to say. Yeah. Because what's the interior of the Alabama defense is the weakness. Yes. Yeah.
And can they take advantage of that weakness?
And that's, and we're acting like we still had a 1,000-yard rusher that had 25 touchdowns. I mean, we're acting like this offensive line is, awful. It's just not as good as it's been the last couple of years. But at this juncture now, when it's good on good and elite on elite, you're right. The margins are so slim, man, that, the difference between you have a B offensive line to an A+ offensive line. That's the difference between, at this level now, winning the national championship or not. Particularly with the way we play offense, I don't disagree. The thing the two things I am the most concerned about are unknowable things. And what's Michigan's bowl prep like? And, JJ said the other day that they're doing completely differently what they did against TCU. That could be good. That could be bad. That could be an overreaction one way, could be a lesson learned. We'll get the answer to that, Mark, about 6 o'clock Eastern, or about 6 o'clock Pacific, I should say, on New Year's Day is when we'll get that answer. The other thing that's unknowable is we did not, even when he was healthy, we did not see JJ run a lot this year. And a lot of us on the Michigan side believe that was really because Michigan just knew they were going to beat a lot of these teams. And why expose that when you don't have a proven Cade McNamara kind of a backup sitting there? Okay, fine. But then we were told that he was ready to go for Ohio State. And I mean, go back and watch that game. The amount of crashing Ohio State did off the edge, off every read look, basically daring at any point. If JJ just kept the thing one time, man, he probably could have ran 40 yards, and never did, never kept it once. I go back even to the last play there on the 3rd and 6 when Michigan was trying to close that game out. And if there was ever a time to have him keep it, that would have been it. They never did. So were they exaggerating about how healthy he was at that point? Or not, and we had questions. Shea Patterson was a very mobile quarterback. We were always very frustrated with why he almost never kept either, so that to me is unknowable. If you were going to tell me that they were going to make JJ a consistent running threat, because if you go back and look at the games where Alabama struggled, particularly with their inside run defense, the games I just mentioned, Auburn, Arkansas, the threat of KJ Jefferson keeping it. Now he's a real runner. Peyton Thorne is not, but he's a willing one. And, what that did to open up, uncertainty in the Alabama defense, that is an absolute must for Michigan to win this game, in my view. And I think it's the kind of game, the first person to 24, I think, will win the game.
Yeah, the more I think about it, read about it, listen to you, listen to myself, I'm going to suppress my score most likely as well. Michigan producing offense in this game. So we talked about JJ, and that's why I think he has to be a runner in this game, just to open up so many things and just to extend a drive that otherwise won't be extended if he doesn't take that opportunity. You talked about the wide receiver situation and the unlikely scenario in which they become a factor. Colston Loveland's an excellent tight end. He's one of the best in the country as a pass receiver. AJ Barner's a complete tight end. They could create some kind of mismatches with both of those guys on the field. But the offensive line, and despite Blake Corum still producing 24 touchdowns, he's at like 4.7 per case, like a yard plus off of his average from last year. They have clearly not been the running team. They're like 70th in yards per carry this year. I don't know if they can operate as a exclusive passing team to tight ends with a plodding running game and create enough offense.
Well, of course they can't. I think that, this reminds me of the conversation before the Ohio State game last year. Well, they haven't thrown the ball all year long, so that must mean they can't. So I guess we'll just put 75 guys in the box. Oh, look, they can throw the ball when you leave them man to man. I think that you're looking at a game plan. If they're willing to let JJ run, that is what opens up the rest of the running game, is the fear of that. And if you go back in the Ohio State game in 2022, much of Michigan's rushing damage occurred in the fourth quarter. Michigan rushed for nothing in the first half of that game. Started getting a little bit of movement in the third quarter, but it was really, that's when JJ running the football, including the run he had there on that touchdown, that was the go-ahead touchdown at that point. And now all of a sudden, Latham Ransom is sitting there on the edge, and a couple of times he's just a little hesitant. Is JJ going to keep that ball or not? And that crease was all Donovan Edwards needed, was to close out that game. So that's going to need to happen here. I mean, JJ, we are not going to run the football consistently unless they believe JJ McCarthy is a running threat. And I think that's where the big plays in the passing game can come from. But I absolutely believe with JJ as a running threat and essentially some form of a modified RPO look where we're consistently attacking the middle of the field, I absolutely believe that Michigan can win the football game if they're able to effectively do that. And more importantly, if they're willing to effectively do that.
So when I make predictions, whether those are season-long predictions or big game predictions like this, I would love to be ahead of the curve. I would love to be able to see something before people are comfortable saying, yes, that's the direction college football is headed. To be able to see that Texas, which I guess to a certain extent I did see them breaking out this year. But with Michigan versus an SEC opponent at this level, I have not seen Michigan be able to compete. Again, what they've done inside the Big Ten, I cannot discount, as they are the gold standard in this conference. You cannot win it 3 consecutive times. No Ohio State fan in their right mind can claim that Ohio State's still the best program in the conference, even though they're recruiting better and all that other stuff, and the record's about the same. They've gotten beaten on the field, and they've got 3 straight titles. But their only connection to extending that dominance is because they've beaten Ohio State, and Ohio State is the only team in the conference basically that's gone out the last 20 years and been able to look capable against the elite competition, whether that's Clemson or the SEC. And I just haven't seen it in so long out of Michigan that there's something that tells me that, am I going to flip on this game on New Year's Day and see maybe a modified version of a pitch to Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards where Jacoby Dean or one of those guys just, from 2 years ago can race from the other hash and just like a BB gun him down. And I'm just going to be like, okay, this is a different level. When they're focused, when they're incentivized, boom, this is going to be Alabama just to the hilt.
I don't think this Alabama team is anything close to the Georgia team you just referenced. Anything close to that. That being said, you could be correct. That could happen. And it won't deter one iota my love for this season or this team. To me, everything at this point is gravy. I don't, and I just speak for myself. I don't ever claim to speak for Michigan fans or anybody else. You can be any kind of fan you want to be, as far as I'm concerned. But for me, I'm 50. This isn't my first rodeo. I've seen plenty of Michigan teams fall on their face in this position in January. Won't change what I think at all. The primary goals of our program have always been to beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten championship. Anything that happens after that is gravy. But you're 5 minutes away from Beano Cook telling us just to not even show up and bring the band. I guess we'll go out there and play, Mark, and I guess we'll just, roll around in the grass for a while, and I guess we'll just kind of hope to be that plucky bunch that gets lucky with our 20 NFL draft picks and just kind of hope that it turns out okay.
Well,
May fortune smile, may fortune smile upon us.
I gave you a 4-point prediction of a 4-point game on your show. So no, in no way am I discounting Michigan. I'm just saying that it's been an SEC dominated sport, and there's only been one school in this conference that.
Here's why. We're just, as a program, now that's going to change here soon. In the next 2 to 4 years, this is going to be a fairly level playing field. These guys are all going to be given revenue sharing and everything else.
So.
Okay, that's going to happen. We haven't. The universities are in an untenable situation right now where, like, look at the last court ruling on the transfer case. You had the court say to the NCAA, so these guys aren't employees, right? The NCAA said, yeah. The courts came back and said, why are you trying to enforce a non-compete on people who aren't working for you? You can't. You wouldn't do that in any other student. There's they're still students, right? So they're not employees. No, they're students, right? Then why are you enforcing non-competes on students who aren't employees? You wouldn't do that anywhere else. You can't. And so what's happening, and the amount of guys in the transfer portal and everything right now, we're looking at a situation where Ohio State could very well end up with whoever's on the team right now as the quarterback next year. Your starter moves on, and you just can't get in. You can't win a bidding war for Cam Ward. I don't believe DJ Uiagalelei is an upgrade over Kyle McCord myself. I don't think the Kansas State quarterback is an upgrade over Kyle McCord myself, and he's going to USC anyway, apparently. And so this is an untenable situation now. Where now we've gone from the schools have all the leverage and protection to they have none, and the players now have more freedom to remonetize themselves than professionals do. There's no way that's going to be a long-term deal. They're going to just end up formalizing a relationship. But until that moment, we are just never going to be a program that deals in the let's give 18-year-olds a bunch of money. Let's pay kids to even visit the school. I wish we would, but that's just not Michigan's MO. It's not its ecosystem, not what it's ever going to be about. And so as long as Michigan chooses to self-limit like that, and if it did play that game, I mean, we have levels of boosters that make what universities like Alabama have, look like romper room. The alumni, the wealth of the alumni that we have in our universities up here are way wealthier than the teams down south. It's just we don't mobilize our boosters like that. Michigan's not going to do that. And so until it does, I just don't think it's realistic that we're going to be beating teams like Alabama for national championships. I will say that this year, I think, is a unique scenario where Alabama is not as dominant as it has been. Michigan has a potential first-round draft pick either this year or next at quarterback, and a lot of guys that are in their 4th, 5th, or 6th year of playing college football. And you can, you see it in the NCAA tournament where you can bridge that gap with a Kentucky or North Carolina and Duke that out recruits you every year because you're Gonzaga and you're older, if you know what I'm trying to say. Your guys have been in the program longer. This is a unique scenario where I think it could happen. And so that's why I'm more optimistic than I have been in the past. But that being said, I don't think it's like some kind of guarantee that we're going to go in there and win or anything of that nature. I still think, if based on history, I don't blame anybody for picking Alabama.
And so despite this being a unique scenario, as you just laid it out, you're not desperate to win this game and you just still consider this gravy, even though this could be a once in a decade opportunity.
Yeah. I can't, if I allow myself to get into a situation where we went 13-1 and beat Ohio State and then won the Big Ten and I'm disappointed, I need to reconsider my life choices, I think. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be like, walking out of the Rose Bowl with my son here in a couple of weeks, like, slapping 5 and cracking knuckles, but that was a great L. But dude, we went 13-1 and won 3 straight Big Ten championships. And I mean, it's not my life, man. If I get to the point where that's disappointing to me, then I think it's probably time for me to dial it back a bit.
Well, good for you. We Not that I'm surprised by that answer. We certainly spend a lot of our time on here talking people off the edge and off the cliff and letting them know, hey, let's not tie our identity to a football brand. Like Jerry Seinfeld once said, laundry, especially in this day and age,
Right.
laundry.
No, don't give me too much credit. If we would have lost to Ohio State, I would have been there. Okay. All right. But we climbed the mountain. That's the mountain, um, and maybe it's generational. I grew up in an era. I grew up in the Schembechler era as a child, and that was the parameters of our program. And my feelings on this could change if we had a more level player acquisition field, if you know what I'm trying to say. Okay. If we're sitting here, if we're fortunate enough to still be sitting here and 3 to 5 years from now, and now we've got, standardized revenue sharing with players and stuff across the board, then my opinion might be a little bit different right now, but we don't. And I'm not here to, I don't care that these, as I said before, if you're, as long as we're not harboring criminals, people that are menaces to society or campus, then at that point, I'll even get rid of the academic requirement, because most of what these schools teach is a bunch of, pagan, un-American gobbledygook anyway. So I don't care what your degree is.
That's a great point.
I don't care. I used to have those used to be my 2 rules. Don't abandon the academic mission of your university, and don't harbor criminals. Well, now I'm at the point that I want you to abandon the academic mission of most university. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so now I just have one. So now I agree with Cardale Jones. No one brought him there to play school. I agree with him. The one thing I still say is, no menaces to society, man. Other than that, you're playing a sport where at any minute your spine could crack. So no, I don't care if Alabama has a booster that takes care of a player and his mama. I don't think this, and in no other context of human history would that be considered like some immoral act. People who have a lot taking care of people who have a little in exchange for a service rendered. That's actually called commerce in like every other era of human history that I'm aware of. Okay. Except for college sports, it's the only time and place in all of human history that's not considered a benevolent action. So no, I don't care. I'm not crying. I'm not whining. I wish Michigan did more of these things, because we have a lot more revenue than the boosters at Alabama do, but we don't. And so as long as we choose to self-limit doing those things, there's always going to be a roster advantage against us in some of these situations. And I recognize that. And I have to therefore adjust my expectations accordingly. But I do think, given the makeup of our team this year, given the makeup of their team this year, there isn't a first-round draft pick next year, top 10 wide receiver. There isn't. They don't have a Henry Ruggs, let alone a Jalen Waddle. They don't. Okay. There's no Derrick Henry there. No Najee Harris there. We played all those guys in a Citrus Bowl a few years ago, by the way. They don't have those guys this year. Now, maybe Isaiah Bond will be that guy a year from now. He's not that guy right now, And so, given the experience on our team, I do think there's an opportunity to bridge some of that talent gap at the the nth level that in many other years we probably couldn't manage to accomplish, like when we played Georgia a couple of years ago.
Because I believe the lowest rated talent team that ever won the national championship was Sean Watson's team at number 9. This Michigan team's at 14, I believe, something like that. But what's not being accounted for, and is difficult to quantify anymore, is, of course, the influx of the transfer portal. And, of course, Michigan's been instrumental in plugging holes through the transfer portal.
Yep. And I think Michigan has discovered twofold. One, they have learned how to keep guys in school longer. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to make it look like we're pious over here and everybody's an amateur. That's not true. Okay. I mean, I've pointed out to you before, we have over 100 players on our team that have been on scholarship at some point, and you're only allowed 85. So there's a lot of guys, that have been in this program that are getting taken care of. Michigan has just chosen to not get into the seedy underbelly of high school recruiting with agents and stuff at that level. I mean, you could have called me up the night Walter Nolan got in the portal and there was a Michigan graphic, and I could have told you never happening in a million years. And his family is just putting Michigan on there because it's good to blow up his leverage, his value in a market. Michigan's never playing in a market like that. But also Jimmy, because of his NFL background, does not want to give a bunch of kids who haven't played here yet a bunch of money. He thinks that's toxic for the locker room, and so Michigan instead will take care of Blake Corum, make sure he's got a 6-7 figure check, and you'll make more money here for one more year than you would be being a 5th round pick in the NFL. That's where, and that's how we've had Trevor Keegan stay in school, and a lot of these guys, is because that's where we have spent our money, is on guys that are proven, or bringing guys in who have already proven themselves somewhere else via the transfer portal.
Do you have any interest in this other game, Texas-Washington?
I think it's going to be a tremendous game. What I think is fascinating about it, Mark, is the strength of the Texas defense. This is the 1 year that we've had a Big 12 team in the playoff where they up front look like a national championship team is supposed to look. Okay. Here's the problem, though. I don't know how much that matters against Washington, the way they play offense. I mean, if Michael Penix is healthy, they get rid of that ball so quick. There are so many mismatches with those 3 receivers. I mean, I was back in Ann Arbor for the Purdue game this year, and went to dinner with a couple of Michigan boosters, and they were asking me, who's the one team I was afraid of? And I said, at the time, I said Washington, because they're the one team I thought that could force us to get out of the tempo of game we want to play. You know what I'm trying to say? That they hit like 2 mismatches in the first quarter, be up 14-0, and all of a sudden we're like, oh bleep, we're not going to get away with kind of playing our anaconda game. They're going to speed us up. And I didn't think any other team could do that to us unless we turned it over and made mistakes. Not have us do that to ourselves, but they do that to us. Okay. And I do think it'll be an adjustment with all 3 of those. People forget, one of those, Odunze's been healthy all year. The other 2 guys, Polk and is it McMillan? They've been in and out of the lineup, especially McMillan, much of this since pretty much that Oregon game. And you saw in the Oregon rematch with all 3 of them there, it's just really hard to keep him in that pocket long enough to put pressure on him without one of those guys getting open. And so that's what I think will be fascinating, is with the Texas defenses, with its strength and its front 7. I don't know how relevant that's going to be against a team that's going to spread you out, and with those frisbee catching dogs, and just throw the ball all over the yard. On the other hand, I think the Texas offensive line will just destroy Washington's defensive front.
Yep.
So I think the contrast in styles there, I think, is going to be really, really fascinating. Sarkisian going up against his old program, of course. Kalen DeBoer is 10-0 against ranked teams as a head coach, man. All right. And he's only been a head coach for a little bit too, so indoor on a fast track. I think that's a very fascinating matchup and a complete flip of the coin.
Now, to me, it's a little bit more simplistic than that, in that I see everything that you do out of this Washington offense exposing not necessarily a weakness, but almost any secondary can be exposed just because of the nature of the game and the rules that favor the offense and the receivers. But where Texas can pretty much match, I believe, with receivers and quarterback play, what Washington does, maybe a smidge less, but they're just so much better and have so much more fortitude up front on both sides of the ball, that I just think Texas is a superior football team at the line of scrimmage. And that will matter to some degree. Of course, it's a collision sport and still is, and one at the line of scrimmage, that Texas, I think, is a clear better team.
I don't think the Big 12 was very good. I think Washington is a more talented version of Oklahoma. And I think indoor on a fast track, Washington could absolutely recreate what was the scenario, what was the game script that Oklahoma built in order to deliver Texas's only L? I think I don't think Washington is interested in getting into hand-to-hand combat with Texas. It's not how they play anyway. You know, they're going to just try to go around them. They're going to try to blitzkrieg them, not Maginot line them. And I, I, I think if Quinn Ewers is on, then and if you're telling me that Xavier Worthy's high ankle sprain is okay, but Quinn Ewers was really good in the Big 12 championship game, but he's really not been that great since the Alabama win. That's how you're the quarterback at Texas and a top 5 team, and you're not even a Heisman candidate. You're not even getting mentioned, So we'll see. Here's the one thing I know for sure. Washington's not going to run for a lick on them. And I don't think Texas can cover those 3 receivers, because I don't think anybody can if they have time. So I think that'll be a fascinating matchup. I think if you're Texas, you want to slow the game down and make it and put it in more of a mosh pit. And you do not want this to be a battle of who can get in the most plays, because that's where I think Washington is a more talented version of Oklahoma, and they can recreate that game script.
What causes me a little hesitancy on my outlook on this game is that Washington did show up to be a more stout rush defense and offensive line play against Oregon in the rematch, because they were healthier.
Mm-hmm.
They're healthier all over the place. Their secondaries, you've gotten guys back there. Of course, you mentioned the receivers. Some of their key defensive linemen showed up in that Oregon game that had been missing. So they're a much healthier football team and proved to be a little sturdier than I give them credit for.
I just think with the rules of the game, as you referenced earlier, those 3 receivers, and we're not talking ragamuffins here either. These are pro receivers. It's hard to guard all of those guys. It's hard for not one of them to be open at all times, and I wonder if Texas might say, let's see if Washington has the patience to matriculate the ball down the field here a little bit. Let's see if Michael Penix will, because we've seen this in Indiana, we've seen it in Washington. He can get greedy if you force him to keep throwing the ball underneath and make mistakes, right? Okay, and so how patient is Michael Penix willing to be? I think if I were Texas, that's what I would want to know. I would want to see how content are they to have to hold the ball and move it down the field steadily, as opposed to giving them an opportunity just to throw the ball up and those receivers just moss me all evening long.
Steve, we appreciate you being here. Have a great trip out to the Rose Bowl and enjoy it with the family, regardless of the result. Merry Christmas to you. Appreciate you being here. I'm not going to ask you whether you're rooting for the Big Ten, because I think I know better that you really don't care. You have no conference pride or investment in the Big Ten bowl record.
Y'all ripped that out of me this year. No, it does me no good. I hope you guys do well. I don't care about stuff like that.
I'm not even talking about Ohio State specifically, just the entire league.
I used to be a conference pride guy. This past year, y'all did your best to rip it out of me. You did. And if I hear Matt Rule bitch and moan one more time that he lost, 52-7 or whatever it was because we scouted him, I first of all, I'm gonna have to pop like 7 Cialises to ever get an erection again, because of the testosterone that he is just dumping his T level into the sea. I mean, it's so wimpy and emasculating. It's embarrassing. But, now that we have scoreboard on everybody, I'm over it now. But I appreciate it, Mark. You guys all have a Merry Christmas too. We're this plucky underdog. We'll do our best to go out there and not embarrass the league, and we'll give it our all, and we'll see what happens.
You can't play that card. You're not the Vegas underdog. You are the favorite. You are the favorite. All right, Steve. Great to see you as always. I appreciate you making the time.
You bet, man. May the odds be ever in our favor, Mark. Thank you.
The one and only Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. It's MichiganPodcast.com. It's also Michigan Podcast, of course, on Twitter and right here on YouTube. And he even allows me to show up most weeks to talk some college football. So we always have a good time doing that. We are going to be back at 4:30 Eastern. 4:30 Eastern. We've got a Kentucky update. We've got an Ohio State update. We know that the Buckeyes had an outstanding recruiting class. However, they did lose some 5-star flips. One just came today, maybe a high 4-star in the case of Jeremiah McClellan. So we'll find out what happened there and get the complete recap on the Kentucky recruiting class. If the real MVP's out there, I don't know if I have any other Kentucky fans that join us here at the Voice of College Football on a regular basis. Although I got to say, we post those Kentucky videos over on the SEC channel, and they do quite well. Like 5,000 people showing up for a Kentucky video. So that is good to see. We do have a super chat coming in. Appreciate that coming in from Matthew Miller. Yes, Matthew. So before we read Matthew's comment, I want to remind everyone to join Matthew right here. Right there. Texas, Washington, college football playoff. And oh, yeah, Texas with the top 5 recruiting class that was signed on this very day, National Signing Day. So Matthew will have the complete rundown of the National Signing Day gains by Texas, and also, of course, more talk about Washington and the college football playoff. But Matthew is letting us know here, Texas also turned the ball over 4 times, and Dylan Gabriel rushed for 113 yards. Neither of those things will happen in that game. Join Matthew tonight. Well, I am certainly more sure that Michael Penix is not running for 113 yards. Whether Texas is going to turn it over 4 times, probably not, and probably not, especially against that defense, because it's a defense that's better than it's been most of the season because they have gotten healthy prior to the Pac-12 championship game and showed themselves to be a little bit stronger and a little bit more assignment disciplined than they had shown for weeks. I pretty much know who I'm going to pick in these 2 playoff games, I believe. But we shall see. We will make our official predictions here later in the month. Again, 4:30 Eastern, Kentucky, Ohio State. We've got a Florida State show tonight. We've got also Miami. Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. But make it back here at 4:30 Eastern. We'll have some more National Signing Day updates for you.